You heard the news.
Yeah.
And what was your first thought? What were some of the things you were thinking?
I think it's a relief for Glen and the family. I know Glen and I are the same faith. We're both Christian, and I know where he is now, and I know that he's in a perfect place. Glen was one of the most unique guys. You know, you think of Glen country, Alice Cooper rock and roll. We couldn't have been closer. He was one of the premier guitar players in both rock and country. And a lot of people don't know this, but I mean, when the respect he had in the rock and roll world, people like Eddie Van Halen one time, you know, said, "Can you get me a guitar lesson with Glen?" Now most rockers would go, "What?" That's the kind of guitar player he was. He was considered one of the 5 best guitar players out there. And it's not, but he was the most unique guy. I played a lot of golf with Glen, had a lot of laughs with him. And when I heard this happening, I was almost hoping that he would go sooner, because I know that it's a long, slow, cruel death. And but you know, our families were very, 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 very tight. Cheryl and Kim are very good friends. Our kids are very close. Cal and Calico and everybody. But they all grew up together.
You said 3 years ago in an interview that you saw him slipping. What were some of the things you noticed?
You know, it was one of those things where I'd be playing golf with him. And this is when he was in good shape. He was out touring, and he was playing guitar, and he was playing golf every day, and he was doing Branston. And every once in a while, he'd tell me a joke on the first tee. And then about the 4th tee, tell me the same joke again. And then about the 16th hole, he would tell me the joke again. And the guys, you know, we'd all just kind of go, well, maybe he's just forgetful. You know, we could just see the beginnings of it, of him slipping a little bit, you know. And those were the things that kind of raised our. He was doing the pudding one time, the Christmas pudding, and Gary Muledeer and I were backstage, and we were telling jokes. Everybody was telling jokes, and I told him a joke, and he was laughing his head off, and he left. Come back like 10 minutes later, and he says, "Tell me that joke again." I tell him the joke. Came back like 5 times, and finally Gary went, "Something going on?" And I went, "Yeah, something's not quite." Yet you put a guitar in his hand, and he was a virtuoso. You get him on stage, and he was automatic. I don't care how much he had slipped, he was there. When it came to that, he was there. Same thing with golf. The guy was the best. I always said, as an amateur, 60 yards in, the best player I ever played with. He was a master short game player. But I mean, we had some really fun times. I played at least 1 or 2 times a week with Glen when he lived here in town. So I saw him all the time. You know.
You said he was unique. What made him unique, and particularly when you think of your relationship with him, your friendship with him?
It was unique in the fact that I was so far away from him in music, the character of Alice Cooper, and he was so far into the middle, really mainstream rock and roll. You know, he was sort of, he could go hang out with the Rat Pack, or he could hang out with Donnie and Marie, or he could hang out with the Beatles, or anybody. He was in that middle. He was just sort of the all-purpose, good-looking kid that could do anything. He was the golden boy. And yet, him and I were like this when it came to sense of humor, when it came to golf, when it came to music. You know, he played on almost every Beach Boys. You know, he played on the Beach Boys songs, played on all the early rock stuff. He was so well thought of in the business as a musician, and as a singer, and as an all-around entertainer, you know, that, I mean, I really looked up to him on that level. And he was always personable, always laughing, always ready to make you laugh. Just, you know, he had that. He had it all. He had the charisma that you just can't buy, you know.
The Scottsdale red light ticket.
Yes.
Did you think of that today?
The day that normally I drive. And Glen and I are late, of course, for our tea time. I pick him up, you know, and he said, "I'm going to drive." And I said, "Okay, Glen, go ahead." So, of course, he takes that McDonald turn, going about 60. And I see the thing flash, and I went, okay. I said, that's going to be a good picture. Glen Campbell and Alice Cooper going like this. They have that at the police station in Paradise Valley. They have a blow-up of that picture of me and him, looking like two kids two deer in the headlights, And I said, that's a great picture. That's a great album cover right there.
It really is.
Now, the day that he got busted for coming home from Phoenix, Glen Campbell would have lunch, and he would have a little glass of wine, because he was trying to stay very straight. The day that I couldn't play with him, I said, hey, Glen, I said, I can't play today. I said, I've got interviews in the morning, I've got to do radio and everything. I said, okay, Matt. So he goes out to Phoenix, and he has lunch, and he has about 6 of those little glasses of wine, and drives home. And of course, some guys, when they get a little drunk, hillbilly boy gets a little belligerent, takes a swing at the cop after he gets home, and the cop goes, Glen, I wasn't going to even give you a ticket, but you can't take a swing at me. And then all of a sudden he's in there. But even at that, you sit there and you go, come on, Glen. As smart as you are, you can't do that. It was just a slip.
What was the best thing that you brought out of him, and what was the best thing that he brought out in you?
I think that we were both songwriters. We were both musicians. We were both in the business 50 years. And so we understood the business. We both survived the alcohol and drug world. I mean, he was, he did cocaine more than just about anybody out there during that, what you would call the LA blizzard, when everybody was into cocaine. But he had a real problem with it. I mean, a huge problem. He navigated through that. I navigated through that. We both came out the other end with great families. We both came out sober. We both became Christian. We both understood where we were, and that's what we had in common, is that we were survivors of that world. And we both moved to Phoenix to get away from that world. And still we're in the business. In other words, you can be in this business and be a Christian and navigate your life through it. And I think that's what we really had in common. And our families were the same way. Our families understood that. Maybe the weirdest thing ever with Glen was going to a Passover Seder, a hillbilly Passover Seder. What? You went to a Seder? Yeah, at Glen Campbell's house. And it's like, what? What?
This makes sense.
I mean, I've never been to a Seder before, and I didn't know what a normal Seder was, but especially a country western Seder was very unique,
It's different for sure.
With Mel Schultz. Mel Schultz was the next door neighbor, and so Mel was
It makes a lot of sense now. Out of context, though, it's a lot more funny. Is there one thing that you look back and you go, you know what, this is my favorite part about Glen?
Glen was always, if Glen called up and said, Alice, let's play tomorrow, I'd go, absolutely, let's go. I loved being with Glen. I loved playing golf with him. I loved, he had a million stories about his world, and I had a million stories about my world. In other words, he would tell me a story about Roger Miller and Bobby Goldsboro and this guy, and I'd laugh, and I'd say, okay, I'll tell you a good one on Paul McCartney and Jimi Hendrix. And, I mean, we could both tell a lot of stories because we were both in those different worlds. And sometimes it crossed over. I mean, we did know all the same people. We knew the Sinatras, and we knew Elvis Presley, and we both knew the Beatles, and we both knew. So we all had stories about that, too. So a lot of it was just telling stories about the stuff that happened to us. And Glen had some good ones. I mean, Glen was, he got around.
That's a good way to put it.
But we both ended up with great wives. We both ended up with great families. And, I was married 41 years. Cheryl and I have been married 41 years. And her and Kim were both dancers. So there was a lot in common, just a very lot in common between the families. My daughter, my son, and my other daughter, all in the music business. His kids, all in the music business. So there was, there was all kind of intertanglement in the families.
With Alzheimer's, sometimes there's that almost a grieving period of when you know that person has it, and then, as you said at the outset, relief. Is there a part of you that's kind of this was coming. I'm already kind of reached this conclusion.
I think everybody in that particular disease, you know that it's inevitable. There's no cure for it. And you kind of, when they get really, really over the top bad where you can't really function, you just go, any time now would be a good time. You know, you don't sit there and say, oh, I hope he lives another 10 years, because it's just living in misery for everybody for 10 years. And I'm sure Glen, if it were up to Glen, Glen would have said 5 years ago, would have been fine with him, you know. But Kim was just so faithful, you know, in taking care of him. And his family, his kids were so faithful in taking care of him. And, you know, I mean, they're in that period now of grief that's unexplainable. But, you know, Cheryl just emailed Kim just now, a couple of seconds ago. And, you know, we'll be in touch with them, the whole family. Unfortunately, I think I'll be on tour when the funeral is. I'll be in Europe or I'll be somewhere, you know. But we'll certainly, they know that we're there with them.